So, well, then that's it as far as logistics are concerned. So we'll head over to the program right now. So the first speaker is Byron Cook. So Byron Cook is a professor at University of London. I'm sorry, just give me a moment. So he's a professor of computer science at University College London, and he's also vice president and distinguished scientist at Amazon. His research interests include computer network security, program analysis, verification, theorem proving, logic, everything under formal methods. He has tons of papers and accomplishments to his credit, but the one that stands out and highlight is that the broad adoption of formal methods and automated reasoning at Amazon. So today, he's going to talk about the interplay between corporate, academia, and government, a very apt topic at PLMW. Over to you, Byron.
How's that doing? Are we too loud, maybe? Is that good? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I'm a loud person, by the way, so you might turn it down. Once I get going, like I'll get louder and louder. So thanks very much. Welcome. I'm assuming from the context of the workshop that many of you are new to the field or considering entering to the field. So welcome to programming languages and formal methods. I had a lot of fun writing this talk. I've never given this talk before. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed writing it. We'll see how this goes. It's a little bit experimental. So the goal of the talk is to give you a clear picture of what's happening around you. I'm assuming that many of you are sort of relatively new to the field. You're probably an academic, or you're a PhD student, or you're an undergrad or a master's student considering this field. And so this is sort of what life feels like right now. Like you're fogged in, you kind of don't understand the big surrounding context. And I wanted to take a moment today to sort of look at the bigger picture of what's going on around you. And I think that this will have a number of benefits for you. So I think it sets you up to do actually better research. You'll find better problems. You'll find better solutions to the problems. Your work will potentially have more positive impact from this talk. I think that some of the things I'm going to tell you today may set you up longer term to get better funding or resources, be that during your degree work now or your sort of early career. Maybe you're brand new as a postdoc, or maybe you've started sort of your life as a faculty, but also longer term as you go along. And then I also suspect that that some of the things I'm going to say today will give little breadcrumbs for better career prospects, which will pay dividends over time. And so the talk is sort of structured along the following way. So I wanted to we're going to go through a case study of how industry, academia, and government worked together. And then I have some thoughts on where to work and where not to work and when to switch jobs, and then a plea for you to please go build your network, to make friends, like actual true friends, but also colleagues, and have a rich network across the community. And what a wonderful way to build that then at PLDI. So since it's the beginning of the PLDI, I think that's apt. And then I wanted to leave time for Q&A, and I'll stay for the break also, so we can talk more there. So I'm gonna give you the same story in 3 dimensions. So I'm trying to sort of give you different, the X, Y, and Z dimension on essentially the same story. So by country, by topic, and by career. And so we're going to start with the United States, which is, maybe you can hear my accent. I'm originally from the U.S. I've lived in Europe and the U.S. both. But what I'm going to tell you is actually will be true for other places like EU, China, to some degree South America, but I know the US the best, so I'm going to tell you the story from the US perspective. And we're going to talk about how government, academia, and industry connect up. And this is going to be the final story. So this is the graph we're going to build about how all the different possible links there. But we'll begin with the university, because again, I assume that's kind of where you're coming from. And I assume that you will be surrounded by professors, and you have a professor, and thus you have ample opportunity to hear about how to figure out how to operate in the academic environment itself. So I'm not going to belabor that point. But let's imagine that you're a PhD student in academia and you go work for Amazon, right? Which would be a good outcome for me. Already, you coming, let's say an Amazon internship is like 12 weeks, right? So already you've gone and you've brought yourself, and you've been hired because you're early in an area, and we're thinking you're going to help us figure out some stuff. So solutions and people are going into Amazon, and then when you go back after 12 weeks, and this happened to me in my internship, I actually switched PhD topics when I did my internship at Intel. I went in as a PL, Haskell, type systems EE. I was working on like Haskell runtime kinds of things. And when I returned from Intel, I was a formal methods researcher after 24 weeks. And so you go back to university with problems. You go back, hopefully with some impact, and then you go back. So I'm saying that the people are going back. Now, you might also do an internship in government. So here I've chosen NASA, and you have the same story, right? You go, you solve problems, you bring things that you know from the university into NASA. Maybe the researchers over at NASA didn't know about that paper that came out last year from from your advisor's friend, or someone who visited the university and you saw a talk. So you're bringing ideas, and then you're taking back problems, and then you're going back. So some interns eventually go into industry or government full-time, and that's great. But also interns don't, right? So some interns eventually go back to university and then teach the next generation. And so at Amazon, like sometimes people will come for an internship and we offer them a job at Amazon, and then they don't come to Amazon, and people think I'll be really upset about it, but I'm actually thrilled, right? Because if Amazon were to hire all the people in formal methods all at once, then that would mean no one would be left to teach the next generation. So we need a healthy ecosystem, and so people coming and going to me seems extremely healthy. Okay. And so what now we're getting to the area you may not know as well. So professors too actually have a sort of internship program that they can join. They're called visiting scholars or visiting researchers. So and most companies that are relatively healthy have something like this going on. So Google, for example, has their visiting researcher program. We have something called Scholars. So Scholars is academics can come 1% to 100% time. They can dial that up or down as much as they like. Typically, professors come for like 20% time during the school year and full time during the summer. Here's the current set of scholars in the area of formal methods in PL at Amazon right now. Most of them, Frank Tipp, I think just joined, but the others have been around for a while. And then we also give money, right? So Amazon and Google, and I would presume Apple and so on, give out small awards. So here are the current recipients of Amazon's automated. These are all people that when they clicked for their application for money, they said, yes, I'm doing work in the space of automated reasoning. And so why are we funding this work? This is helping the teams, the industrial teams, or maybe government if they do similar things, learn about what's possible. This tends to get them like engaged with the research, and they kind of understand the frontier of what's happening, but also grow what's possible. So there's often areas that they think are interesting, but would be difficult to invest in within the company right now. So it's great to see the universities doing that work, and then maybe we can pull that work in. Okay, so I'd say that we're basically from our graph, we're just adding money right now, right? That's the main thing we added. And then also Amazon and a lot of other companies will also fund very specific projects. So for example, we've funded CVC5. We paid for so CVC4 became CVC5 when it added proof production, and Amazon paid for that work. So if you look at their paper on CVC5, you'll see we're being thanked. But also lots of other organizations are being thanked. Now, one thing that I do quite frequently is I write these letters of recommendation, right? So I'll be asked for a letter of support, and these are typically for the government organizations that are funding people like doing CVC5 or other tools. And so there, I'd say, you know, what's happening is industry, I'm putting references into the government, and then the government is also sending money. So this graph is now, you're seeing it's getting thicker and thicker. So government agencies are not just piggy banks for you to pull money out of, right? They also like serve they are providing a service to our you know, to your nation or whatever, but they also, I mean, they have researchers too. So a really great example of that from my area is this guy, Sean Weaver. So Sean Weaver is he's been at a national security agency for 20-something years. He's an expert in satisfiability solving. And so here's an example of a paper he's written with Byron Cook, who is an academic at CMU, but also an Amazon scholar. And so this is a theme that's going to come up a lot. It's about, and that's sort of what I was saying about PLDI. It's about these connections. So why is Byron Cook a scholar at Amazon? Well, this guy named Brad Martin, who's going to be a character who shows up quite a bit in this talk, who was Sean Weaver's manager at National Security Agency, I know quite well. And he told me about Byron's work. So he was distributing SAT solving, and that's work that was extremely exciting to me. So then when I was at a conference, I met Byron, and I kind of made time to go chat with him. And ultimately, we decided maybe he should come to Amazon part-time. So this is so I guess what I'm saying is that references are going both ways, right? Industry and government are chatting about the work that's going on in academia. And so I'm encouraging the government to fund certain things, and the government's encouraging me to go talk to people that they're funding such that that can have impact on industry. Okay, so that guy Brad, who introduced me to Byron, went on, so he's been at the National Security Agency for 25, 30 years, but he's currently on a approximately 4-year visit to DARPA, that's the Defense Research Lab, if you will. And so he started this program called Provers. So Provers is based on, basically what he saw is he saw Amazon applying formal methods in the CI/CD pipelines, right? We do a proof, and then whenever a change to the code comes along, we have tools to try and figure out what needs to be done. And then, I mean, we're not doing it well, but we're trying to do it, right? And so what Brad recognized is that this capability could be really useful for suppliers, for government, for the software that the government's making, that he wanted this capability, and also that he saw that by funding research in this space, Amazon could do that better, and then that would make Amazon better. And as I'll talk about in a few moments, Amazon is also a supplier of software to the government, so it's all good. So one thing that I've seen a lot is that industry provides case studies to the government. The government is able to look at what's working well in industry, and they're able to say, oh, look at these 5 things. These are super interesting. Let's build a case study about how they've used that, and then we can pull those ideas that are working into the government. Wanted to say a little bit about people moving around. So there's a couple of examples. Kathleen Fisher, she was at Bell Laboratories for a while. Then she went to Tufts. Now she went to DARPA. She's the director of the part that's sort of the most connected to PLDI topics. And that's it's approximately a 4 or 5 year stay. And so then presumably she'll go back to Tufts when she's done. Another example to consider is Jeanette Wing. So she was at Carnegie Mellon University. Then she went to National Science Foundation. She was there 4 or 5 years. And again, I think that's a temporary role. Then she went and she led Microsoft Research for approximately 5 years. And then she left Microsoft Research and went to Columbia. So the point I'm making here is that there's a lot of rotation around academia, government, and industry. And you see that a lot. A lot of people have worked at actually all the different places. Okay, so then maybe you've heard about some of these companies, right? You'll probably see Galois people here. Grammatech, MITRE, SRI. You're going to see papers, people from SRI. What are these institutions? Well, they're actually companies that are frequently seen working on these kinds of big projects. So Provers is a very large, very many millions of dollars project to build continuous integration tools for formal methods infrastructure. And what Brad did was he defined a set of milestones, and then companies like MITRE and SRI then sign up to take those on, and they get paid by DARPA they're called DARPA performers. So they do this work. And so basically they're using the DARPA money to fund research that's compatible with where they want to go as a company. So a couple of interesting examples. SRI stands for Stanford Research Institute, I think. It's like a spin-off of Stanford. And MITRE is similar. So the MIT and MITRE is for MIT. And they're really specifically developed as organizations. I think MITRE's even a nonprofit. I think SRI is too. They're developed to do government contracting. So it's sort of in a way, it's a wing of the government, but it's not the government. Then you have companies like Menoidics and so on, and Correct Computation, and these other companies that are more standard companies doing work, but then they happen to be in that world of the DARPA and NSF and so on. Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is that the industry is also providing to government solutions, and then the government supplies money, right? So the government is supplying money to these companies to exist, and then they're building solutions which they vend back, which I suppose is not very controversial. It's sort of like the point of the commercial marketplace. But I'm going to talk about a few other things I'm calling not solutions, which I suspect are a little different. Now, so you may know the FB Infer tool, or I think yesterday was the Infer workshop. So Infer was actually developed by a company called Menoidics. Menoidics was in this kind of world of, they were working in the space of government, and they made Infer. So Peter Ahern, for example, is pretty well known. B. Lavender, who's actually in the room, she's in the back corner. She was the CEO of Menoidics, and they were funded by a national security agency. So they were building tools that then the national security agency could get used within the government space. But then they were acquired by at the time Facebook, now they're called Meta, and then B actually went off and did it again. So then this time with Mike Hicks, she formed another company, again funded by the same source, and then that was acquired, and now B works at Amazon. As does Mike Hicks. He works at Amazon in the AWS identity team. So what I'm saying here, I think, is that the government drives the development of products. There will be things that they want in the commercial marketplace, but aren't there. So what they do is they use their money to cause those things to exist, such that the barrier of entry of those capabilities into private industry goes down, and then the private industry picks them up. So for government, for national security agency, it's a huge win that a company was formed, it built a capability that NSA would like to see existing, and then it gets pulled into the commercial space and then vended back. And in the case of Facebook Infer, Facebook uses it extensively internally and fund it, and then everybody else gets to just use it for free, which, I mean, the government loves free. Okay, so then we have the big companies, right? So here's a picture of an internal workshop at Amazon. All of these people are formal methods people, so we have a really big team. But remember, Amazon and Microsoft and NVIDIA and all these companies, they're also supplying the government with services and hardware. So here the key idea is that there's a name for it called COTS. It's commercial off-the-shelf. And the idea is the government wants there to exist. They fund these companies like the Menoidics, like the Correct Computations, to catalyst commercial off-the-shelf tools that then they can buy back. This sounds insane, right? The government's like funding something that then it's going to pay money for it later. It sounds like a scam, but it's not. The reason it's not a scam is because if they can get the commercial marketplace developing it, if it's successful and other people are using it, the other competing companies are also going to copy that idea because they're competing, and pretty soon the price will begin to drop. And so in the longer term, it's actually hugely beneficial to the government. That's the view of the U.S. government, is that it's hugely beneficial to get these organizations competing, and sometimes the government sees themselves as needing to catalyst these ideas. So an example of that is proof. Formal methods, formal verification, automated reasoning, whatever you want to call it, is a super differentiating capability for Amazon. So we've actually earned lots of money because the Department of Defense, the large security-obsessed enterprises like in financial services move their workload over to AWS off of their own data centers, and they don't choose other cloud providers because they see that the cryptography is proved correct, virtualization is proved correct, networking stack is proved correct. And we work a lot with those companies and organizations to help them understand what it is we're doing and get guidance from them on which parts they would like to see proved, what are the threat models they're worried about. And so these tools being a capability for us is incredibly, incredibly leveraged. Another example, so on the economy of scale, like Amazon and AWS are just big economy of scale company, right? They get big and then they find economies of scale and then they just relentlessly drive those things down so they can just offer stuff for cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and deliver it faster and faster and faster. And for the government, that's great because now they get that service for cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and faster and faster and faster. So that's the idea. Okay, so governments are catalysting ideas, and here's a slight difference. So I said before that the government causes products, but they also cause services. And what I mean by that is they cause things that are like a software as a service, if you will. Okay, another interesting ingredient. And so there's these organizations like the National Institute of Standards and Technology called NIST, and White House, for example, right? And so they are working on regulation, right? So the National what was I going to say there? All right, so the National Institute of, the NIST defines, for example, what it is to be a cryptographic module that's sufficiently strong enough to be used in software that then the government buys. So that's called FIPS 140-3, I think. And they define lots of these kinds of standards. And so then there's mechanisms by which organizations then try and meet that standard. And the NIST sets that. Another example is the White House has recently put out these pretty interesting reports where they're saying, hey, you should use formal methods. So this back to building blocks is saying that the components that we build software out of needs to be formally verified. And the White House is beginning to really understand formal verification. We've actually talked to them quite a bit. On the right, there's this thing about using, so they're quite interested in Rust, and well, what about the unsafe superset of Rust, and how do you handle that, and how do formal methods help reestablish memory safety if you're using Rust, and so on. So what I'm saying here is that they're adding rules and constraints for what the industry can vend back to them. But then we're helping them, right? So they're actually using our experience with the success of automated reasoning to define that. So this idea of, oh, hey, you should go use formal methods didn't come out of a vacuum, right? They were watching the success of formal methods in Amazon and then using that information to then define the rules that should be imposed across the industry. So basically, we're helping them build rules also, similar with the Rust. And then again, like the NIST organization has asked us for information about how we're using automated reasoning, because what they would like to do is they would like to make that process for getting certification much less manual and use programming languages and formal methods techniques. So the point here is that we're also helping them build rules. Okay, so now we've built this insane graph that has so many details it's meaningless to you. But I wanted to, the size of it is kind of the point I wanted to make, that when you're an academic, when you're starting out in your PhD, you're like, oh, great, I write research papers, I go to conferences, I give talks, right? And then magic falls out of the sky. Who's paying for it? I don't know. But what's really happening is there's this whole machine happening that's been going on for many, hundreds of years. Way back in the day, kings had problems. Some other kingdom was like harshing their mellow. So then they asked some smart person in the kingdom, could you help us figure this out? And it's like, oh, you could only visit this many bridges in this many ways because of such and such. Thus, if the invading empire were to come try and attack us, then we could defend ourselves this way. Great, thanks very much. And then someone else in the kingdom was like, we could use that idea, like the Pythagorean theorem, to like measure tax stuff, right? So it's always been that the government, the sort of research brain in people, and then the let's make money brain in people are in partnership, and that's been mechanized in the US, but also in China and Europe and so on. Okay, so that's by country. I wanted to basically tell you the same story, but now by research topic. So here's a pretty fascinating. This is a report. It's a tech report from 1958. but it was a report to the National Security Agency in 1958, which is the basis of SAT solvers, like the start of SAT solving by Davis and Putnam. The original Davis and Putnam idea is started, the first place you can ever see them saying, hey, maybe we could actually solve propositional satisfiability with computers, is in a report to the National Security Agency, 1958. So why was the government worried about satisfiability solving in 1958? Well, if you remember, in 1957, Sputnik happened, right? So I wasn't there, I wasn't alive. I was very far from being alive. But one could imagine that they were like, oh shit, like what if the Soviets figured out how to make P equal to NP and we don't have that capability? Think about all the horrible things that are going to happen. And that's something similar to what's happening in quantum today. So many organizations are investing in quantum, but they don't want to be. They're just like, well, what if someone else does it? So we need to do it too, such that we're like, so they can't get ahead of us, right? And so I would imagine that was what was happening. But anyways, they funded it, and that work started off what became, for many years there was this tool called GRASP, which was sort of the most successful satisfiability solver. When I was doing my PhD, it was GRASP was the tool. Then I went to work for this company called Prover. So for then maybe 5, 6 years, the satisfiability solving was a big industry. Like I made money, and like we were making a lot of money selling satisfiability solvers to aerospace and reasoning about railway switching, and Intel bought like 10% of Prover, and all the Intel circuits. That's where I got my start in this field, was actually working at Intel. So then Prover hired me because I understood Intel circuit design and knew people there, and like great, we're going to be applying SAT solvers to hardware, and all was wonderful until this paper came out. So this paper cost me my job. So it was 2 undergraduates on a summer project at Princeton figured out that if you changed the data structure that kept watched literals, you could align it with regards to cache lines, and suddenly the SAT solver would, even though the SAT solver in theory the algorithm didn't look like it was as good, it was a total game changer. And so this solver was much better than what we had commercially, and so the sales just began to plummet, and it was like, I need to go find a job. So then what happened then is that for 20-something years, you just got, the academic solvers got better and better and better. So this is a graph of the winner of each international SAT competition from 2001, when the SAT competition started, until 2020. Compared on the same benchmarks using the same hardware. So you can just see the solvers getting better and better and better over time. And that's the story, then that's what we went to Amazon. We built a lot of tools based on this. I won't belabor the point, but all customers of AWS are essentially customers of SAT. They just often don't know it. And then the deeply influential types and the security-obsessed organizations often do understand the benefits of it. And there are many stories like this. I could ask me for the Q&A for more if you want. But for example, the head of application security in Goldman TA'd Andrew Appel's course on theorem provers, right? So you very frequently are at these security-obsessed successful companies, and you realize the people you're talking to knew Zohar Mana or something like that. So they often understand what's going on. And that led to things like this, where Goldman gave a talk about their use of formal methods. Okay, so, right, I kind of made that point. So yeah, so tying the story back, and this is, I've already alluded to this, is that AWS is making much more money because we're invested in formal methods, and the Department of Defense, really deeply, influential people who make decisions in the DoD understand quite deeply formal verification. And remember, this is not just America, right? This is true in France, this is true in other places. Okay, so how am I doing for time, by the way?
No, you're doing good.
Okay, good. Yeah. Okay, you were spooking me because I was like, oh wait, I thought I was about out. I'm like, I'm nowhere near done. So, great. So then one point is that there's kind of a new shift. We'll see if this turns out to be true. But SAT solvers, I believe, are going to move back to the emotional heart is going to move back to industry because of this line here. So there's this tool called Malab. Hold up your hand if you know Malab or Malab Mono. Yeah, this tool is like outrageous. Like this is like the LLM of, like this is the open GPT-4 of SAT solving, if you will. So this how you read this graph is, so this solver could solve 275 benchmarks each in 400 seconds. And that compares to the best solver, other known solver, which in 400, they could only solve like 125 benchmarks each in 400 seconds. So it's just like otherworldly. How is it doing that? Well, it's distributing search. It's using multiple machines. It's not just on a sequential microprocessor. It's like hundreds of machines all sharing lemmas as they're doing solving at the same time. So it's just like, wow. But to operate this is a really different game, right? Like if you have a fast sequential stat solver, you can just write it in C, put it on GitHub, and you're done, right? But if to operate these distributed solvers, you now need a team because it's a cloud-based solver. So basically, it's my belief that what we'll see is that things are moving back in the industry. Okay, so to wrap the story up, stat solvers went from went from government to academia to industry. Then the chaff paper came out. Everything moved back to industry or to academia, and then it moved to. I think it's going to move to industry. Similar story for the COVID vaccine, by the way. That was actually a big DARPA project. So the messenger RNA funding 2013 to Moderna, 25 million. And then like, we all know that story. The same with personal computers, GUI. So many people are like, oh yeah, I know the story of like the mouse and GUIs. Steve Jobs went to Xerox PARC and saw it, right? And he built the Apple. Well, the story actually goes way back beyond that. So actually, at SRI, funded by ARPA, which became DARPA, that's where that work began. And so this is a talk from 1968 showing you the mouse and what you see is what you get, text editing, and all the things you use today on your laptop. It was available in 1968. Same with the cloud. That was all fun. That was all like the military all had. It's a version of the cloud, and all that's just moved kind of into available to all of us. So, anyways, I don't want to belabor the point. Okay, so now in the time remaining, let's look. I've never given this talk, so I'm not going to make it on time. Okay, so let's just look at my career really briefly. So I did my PhD. It was funded in part by U.S. Air Force and Intel. I was at a place that was, so it's Oregon Graduate Institute, which doesn't really exist anymore. And why doesn't it really exist anymore? It's because it was on soft money. So it didn't have a big endowment, but they were getting a lot of money from DARPA, National Science Foundation, et cetera. And with the Clinton years and budget cuts and so on, that money went down, and then it struggled financially, and it moved into Oregon Health Sciences University. And so faculty at this university basically could keep their jobs so long as they brought in money. But that's actually surprisingly common, right? So that's going to be true at these organizations, that a part of your ability to hang on to your job is the ability to bring in money. And it's even true at universities. So there's a title called research professor. So if you look at people's titles, you'll sometimes see research professor. And what you'll see is they teach a lot less, but they typically don't have tenure, and the existence of their job is predicated on their ability to bring in money. So my advisor was John Launchbury, who was a big Haskell person. He went on to form Galois, and they wrote this tool called Cryptol, which was funded by the government and in use for government and government contractors, which then we later used in Amazon. Okay, so then what else I want to say here? So I did an internship, which I highly recommend. Basically, like if you're doing a PhD and you don't go do an internship in industry, it's a big mistake. I highly recommend it. I met these three guys when I was doing my internship in the late 90s, who I now work with today. So then I was 10 years at Microsoft, 10 years at Amazon so far. I wouldn't normally point this out, but these were promotions. Yay me, right? I got promoted. But the reason I'm mentioning it is one thing that's really interesting about the industry is that promotions represent very significant pay increases. Like at university, your pay is kind of going to look like this as you grow, right? You start here, you retire here. Whereas for me, it's like this, right? Like it's many zeros are added to the checks. And so that's something to keep in mind when you're moving to thinking about industry. And then I've built kind of a mixed industrial university career, which has its benefits and downsides, which we can talk about during the Q&A. With encouragement from Peter Ahern, because he was actually at the university I joined, and he and I decided to move to University College London, but he also visited me as a visiting researcher at Cambridge. And then I've raised, I don't know, like 10 million pounds, 15 million pounds over the past, I don't know, 15 years or something like that, to pay for postdocs and travel and these kinds of things. Okay. With the time, so when do we need to wrap up? Okay, yeah. So let me allude to some things you could ask about in the Q&A. What's that? Okay. So I have various thoughts about the upsides and downsides of academia. They have to do with about job stability for you is great. Job stability for other people when they're not very good sucks, right? Because that means you're working with a bunch of people who aren't very good. And that's kind of often what you see in the university. And so a lot of the problems you see in university are about the fact that this professor for the next 20 years is going to work with this other professor. But everyone knows that other professor isn't very good, but there's nothing you can do about it. Whereas in private industry, and that, by the way, that's true in government too. In industry, that doesn't really happen. So industry is much more dynamic. It moves really fast. But on the other hand, you get a lot less job stability. So there's pros and cons there. Yeah, so I won't belabor these points because due to time. I'd say that industry, you get less intellectual autonomy because you typically do need to work on things that are going to affect your company, right? Like I'm not going to go work on art tomorrow or biology tomorrow. I might, but I would need to, within Amazon, move to the team that's working on biology. I'm not going to be in the work in AWS and then work on biology unless there's a customer sort of worried about biology. So that's the difference. And then one thing that's kind of happening is that there was these sort of classic, basic research labs like Microsoft Research, where I worked for 10 years, which have basically gone away. They're kind of there by name, but they don't exist like they used to. And there's some reasons for that. But I think it's basically corporations don't want to pay out for far out research. I think there's probably going to be a bit of a pendulum swing. So maybe this will come back someday, but right now that's not really the reality. So what happens is Amazon and Meta and Google kind of distribute this research, right? They let every team themselves, they're like, you can hire a researcher if you want. It's your money, right? And so Amazon teams will hire what we call applied scientists, and if they bring value, then that's great, and if they don't, then game over. Okay, and so then, but I did want to say that there's been tremendous value from those basic research, and so here are the current Amazon employees, bottom, that were all interns at Microsoft Research who were in the formal method space, both at Microsoft Research and Amazon. And on the top left are the former MSR researchers who have joined Amazon. Okay, so I won't get into that. Okay, so I'll take a few more minutes, great. So I wanted to kind of close with the point that my network is my biggest asset by far, right? It's how I learn about, I tend to find combinations between things. I realize like, oh, you could take Farkas lemma and combine it with this Ramsey's theorem based thing, and then you do this other thing, and we can convert that to SLAM, and then voila, there's like 100 lines of Perl, and suddenly we have a tool called Terminator, right? That's kind of how Terminator was born, and it was because of who I knew. More impact because again, you meet people who realize how your tools can be used. Better careers prospects for obvious reasons, right? Because it's like that's how you get jobs is by. I've never gotten a job I just applied for. Every job, even when I was a dishwasher, when I was like 14 years old, was because someone said, "Hey, do you want a job?" Right? Whenever I've applied for a job, it hasn't gone very well, right? It's always like someone is like, "Oh, there's a job you should know about," and then like the application process is just kind of, whatever. But the university professorships is a slightly different case, but everything else has been like that. And then I particularly have found that there's really great value at working kind of the liminal space between government, academia, and industry. So go build those relationships, right? Go do summer, if you're a student, go do summer schools. Go do Marktoberdorf, for example. Visit other institutions. People you meet here, set up time and go visit them. Like go travel to their institution. Give a talk. It'll be a horrible talk, it's fine. Everyone will be like, hey, do you remember that horrible talk you gave? Yeah, okay. But you're meeting people and you're gonna go to lunch with people and you go to drinks with people and like that, and then those friendships you'll make, that you'll go to Marktoberdorf, then 10 years from now, they'll be the person who writes the letter of recommendation for you to get the job or the next job, right? So go build those links. Do internships. Do 2 or 3, okay? Don't do like 10. and come back to your PhD, finish your PhD. Tool-specific Zulip channels, come to workshops, obviously you've done that, so give seminar talks in your university, sign up for things, give talks. Don't, screw them up, it's fine, but give the talks. That way people begin to know and they'll they'll know who you are and you'll learn and grow. My first talk was a complete disaster. I can tell you about it in the Q&A. And then when people come and speak, go and ask questions and go to dinner if you're invited, and so on. Okay, so with that, one final point is we're hiring. So if you're looking for an internship or a full-time job, let me know. And below there is who you'd contact to set that up. So thanks very much.
So the floor is open for questions.
What was your first talk like?
Oh, okay, so I gave a talk. I was a first-year PhD student. It was on System F, and I had a black marker and a whiteboard, and I was whiteboarding. But then I was like rubbing, oh no, that's not what I meant, X, I meant Y. So then I'd black over my hands, but then I was rubbing my face. And then about 10 minutes in, my professor was like, hey, I actually just need to stop you. Like, you look like a mess. And so I had to go clean up. But no, I mean, everyone was very kind about it. That's the first time I've heard that story in like 20 years, so it was fine.
So I have a question. Yeah. So your current affiliation is being both professor and industry. So do you do active research as a part of academia, or how do you even balance these two?
So I am doing biological work, and that biological work is happening at the university right now. So I've kind of, the university doesn't own my intellectual property so long as I'm not at the university full time. I have the option to go to 100% time whenever I want, but I also don't want to create a situation that's really awkward for everyone, where I kind of do work in the same area. So I've kind of carved out in my mind parts of the space that I'm working in between them. And so yeah, I have PhD students. I'm not really like seeking, I don't like, ooh, I want another PhD student, right? But sometimes PhD students will come to me and be like, I've gotten into a massive fight with my professor. I'm going to leave, but could you be my advisor? And I was like, yeah, sure, it's fine. So that I tend to take the ones that like need somewhere to go, and so that's yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, over time, Amazon has kept me so busy, and then I do twice as many trainings, like on corruption or whatever. Right? Like you have to do training or fire. I'm always doing a fire training, right? Because I have to do it at Amazon and the university, and in 2 different countries. So it's like it's a mess. So I often wonder why I do it, but I seem to keep doing it.
And just to follow up, like, can you choose between the two in terms of satisfaction? Like, which one of these is?
So it's amazing. I reported to the Chief Information Security Officer of AWS is like the world's biggest computer, right? Like. It's insane when you realize, like, look at your phone and ask where are those apps really running. It's actually on the cloud, right? Or all your like tax stuff or your flight booking, all that's actually around the cloud. So AWS, and the security of AWS is a really important problem. So I report to the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. And those guys there's like tough issues happening quite often, right? Like customers having a very, very bad day. It's going to make the news. It's going to affect their stock, and we're trying to help them. Like I've had CEOs of Fortune 5 companies cry because we help them and we save their job, right? And the AWS security and the AWS people are just like pros. They're just like super, they never lose their mind. They never scream at each other or so on. And then over at University College London, I've seen people just losing their minds over where the ping pong table is going to be. So the sort of political. The university politics are very intense and competitive. But the thing is, like, the HR system at a company is pretty serious business, right? If you start going around yelling at people, you're not going to be around the company very long. But the university puts up with people. It's a different situation. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about how government and industry sees the role of publication? Like, is it something to do if you want, but they're not going to encourage it, or is it something they encourage for PR purposes, or?
So academia, like that's your job, is to publish, right? Like that is the product. In some sense, you're producing people. You're helping like universities are a place for cultural dialogue about issues, as we're seeing right now. Like on the university campuses, there's big issues being discussed, and so that's sort of part of the role of the university. And then industry is there to like make money for the shareholders. And so if publication is in line with that goal, you're good. So how is it that we publish at Amazon? When I first joined Amazon, I realized that I was being pulled into all these conversations with senior leaders of the big enterprise organizations, Goldman Sachs, Bridgewater Associates, the world's largest hedge fund, so on. And what I realized is in each case, I was meeting with someone who actually knew this. They knew automata, but they were the super technical right-hand person of the chief information officer or something like that. And I realized that they didn't really care what the answers were. They were just getting a feel for the underlying infrastructure, like what is it we were doing? Did we actually know what we were talking about? And I realized actually publication would solve that. So I was like, hey, because when I first joined Amazon, they were like, I went from Microsoft Research, which is like a publication machine, to Amazon, and I was told, yeah, you'll never publish. And I'm like, okay, that's great, right? I've published, like, look at my publication rate as you referred to it. It's just like insane, right? So at some point, it's like, how many World Popul papers can you write? Psst, boring. So I was like, I'm going to go into industry and have a lot of impact. But then after a year or so, it was like, oh, actually, publishing is super useful to help at scale customers understand what's going on, but also to help academia realize where the problems were. Because what you kind of see in academia is often the academics are super sharp, but they don't know what to work on. And so we can convey problems and challenge problems. And secondly, we can communicate to the senior technical people at these large enterprise organizations what's going on inside Amazon very efficiently through publication. Oh, and by the way, then I also get to tell my friends what I'm doing. So that's it. So I think you asked about on the government side. Yeah, there will be similar means. Like governments are trying to supply economic progress for their country, right? Ultimately, that's what security is basically a form of economic security. That's kind of what they're after. Companies are out to make money, and academia is out to produce students and research to help the society stay advanced.
So I wanted to ask, how do you balance intellectual property and trade secrets and stuff like that when writing a publication? I mean, what's the process there? How do you deal with that? I assume that's an issue in industry
extremely
sometimes.
Carefully. Yeah. So I know a lot of things I can't say. There's a funny thing I've realized, that there's an inverse relationship between what you can say and how important your work is, right? Like, so there's just a lot of stuff I can't say because I just know about security things, or I know about big business deals that are happening right now because I get looped into all these discussions about should we make this acquisition, or there is this kind of acquisition happening. How should we respond? And then by piece, it becomes increasingly difficult to navigate. What I've realized is I've gotten more senior too. I mean, this comment I'm making is way off for many of you, but let's say as you grow in your career, you realize that like to scale, you're kind of getting rid of all of the easy decisions, right? So what I'm really doing is I'm decisions per minute. I'm a decisions per minute machine. I'm trying to make good decisions, high quality decisions. And if a decision can be made by someone else effectively, great, let them make the decision. I don't want to know about it. I don't even want to know the details. I only want to work on the hardest things. So I tend to find in Amazon the thing that no one else can quite get and the organization can't quite wrap its head around, and we need to go that direction, and I go do the work to help us figure that out. So what I find is as I've gotten older and older, the decisions on an hour-by-hour basis get harder and harder and harder and harder. They're really, really hard. And so basically, at some point, I'll have to retire because I just can't deal with it.
Oh, you said someone over there.
Yeah, somebody.
Can you share a bit how university will program like Amazon scholars? I believe good universities should support their faculty if they want to go to industries, but is that always the case?
Oh, yeah. So it really depends university to university. So I've, some universities, so I believe governments, companies, and universities sometimes get off piece. They get really confused about what they're supposed to be doing, right? So universities that are trying to make a lot of money, it's a bad situation, right? Because it's like, you're not going to do a very good job of it, and you're just going to you're going to screw up the thing that you're supposed to be really good at. So if you want to make a lot of money, just go make a lot of money, like go into banking. And so you'll see universities get really clingy about IP, and they'll get really clingy about like, oh, you can't do a startup unless you go through our startup program, and then there's a bunch of people kind of get in the way, and like it's like if you just talked to the right venture capitalists, you would have just like really quickly gotten the funding. But oh no, now they need a piece, and now when you make your company, you try and sell it, suddenly the university has to sign off, and they have tag along, drag along rights, and it's just a mess. So the other universities are super hip to this idea. They're just like, great, like intellectual property, what's that? Go for it, I don't care, right? And so Cambridge University is really good. I believe Stanford's really good, you know, and then there's other universities that I don't want to name that aren't so great with regards to that. So you really have to sort of pick. It's actually one thing when you're looking at faculty positions, it would be one thing to consider. Sometimes the state universities are a little worse with regards to this because they have to think about the perception in the public about how they're spending their money.
Can you tell us about, so you showed us that graph, and I think most of that graph mostly said that all these three components within one country, how they work together.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about like how different countries work together in that sense?
Yeah, okay, so yeah, there's another weird interconnect going on. So for example, there's this thing called the Five Eyes. If you Google like Five Eyes, you'll see it's Australia, New Zealand, Canada, US, and Britain all share intelligence, right? And there's actually like people from GCHQ, which is sort of the British equivalent of National Security Agency, can like go into the National Security Agency. They can get on their network and so on. So they share. But then there will be secrets that they keep from each other, obviously. And that happens on the university sense too. So the government agencies will often have, for purposes of creating partnerships with the other countries, pools of money. So I've actually been the recipient. One of the grants I got in the UK actually came from Brad at the National Security Agency because he's like, oh, we have this money that's earmarked for international collaboration. So like no one else in the US, you can't get it, but I can give it to you. Great. So he sent the money, I think, via GCHQ. So that's common. And then you'll see that around, yeah, certain countries will decide that they're trying to build a partnership, and maybe they weren't super close, but they want to be close. And so they'll sort of or maybe something horrible's happened in the country long ago, and they're trying to like make amends, and so they'll fund like collaborative research between them. So you can then be the recipient of these things. So then in the European Union, then things get really interesting, and then Brexit and Britain, and can British universities participate in the EU thing? It's messy. So, but that happens, and it happens a lot. Sorry, I feel like I didn't really answer your question, but I'm sort of like a qualified yes.
Thank you.
Hello, I wanted to know sort of how hobbled will your prospects be if you're picky about working with defense? Like how picky can you be about working on defense with military and so on?
Yeah, so you know, I'm reading the same newspapers you are. So just from the newspaper, I don't know anything. I'm not revealing anything, but I can see from the newspapers that Google has really tried not to go into defense. And so they actually had some contracts, and I think there was like the employees, you know, took various actions to cause the organization to walk back some of those decisions. Amazon has not gone that direction. So here's how I think about it. I've always tried to work on tools that anyone could use. Right? So I wanted to make sure that the tools were open source or had non-military applications, and so activists could use them, governments could use them, companies could use them. Great. So I'm cognizant of the fact that there's actually a slide I deleted, but there's this really great quote from the National Security Agency where it's like, why are you investing in quantum? And they're like, we're investing in quantum because everyone else is investing in quantum. Right? So in some sense, that competition amongst countries creates our jobs. So I'm kind of like that. That I like the fear in the government because then now that pays my bills, and it lets me do research. So I'm kind of into that, but I don't like shooting people. So I'm not for that. So I've tried to do work that wasn't that the only application was something military. That's how I've thought about it.
Yeah, I have a question. So in your talk, you sort of painted a nice picture on how industry and government together, in some sense, orchestrate the research that must be taken forward. Since you've also been an academic, and for our students to, it'd be good to understand what is the contribution of academics as independent contributors. This is unlike, a person working in a company where the decisions are centralized. Same for the government. Yep. But as a professor, as an academic, it's slightly different. So what is the kind of impact an academic can make as an independent contributor?
It's wide and wild. So my advisor John Launchbury went on to build much of the early cryptol Galois work was actually done at the university. And then he realized, oh wait a minute, I can actually just get a lot more money if I form this company, and then, right? So that's one extreme. The other is like Marijn Hule, who, for example, is just interested in propositional satisfiability, but then the government wants access to those tools. So he's not really done any work specifically for them, but they're quite interested in this work. Another example would be like Greg Morissette. So Greg Morissette sits on all kinds of boards and panels, right? So there's some, I forget the name of it, but there's some panel of super geniuses that get together to advise the federal government on what are the risks. And I'm always being interviewed for these kinds of things, right? And it's often from Greg Morissette. Yeah, so you can advise the government, you can go visit the government, you can just build tools that they happen to use. You could avoid the government. Yeah, so from an academic view, it's like there's nothing you can't do. So yeah, I like your portrayal of my talk because it was the point I was trying to make, is that it's decentralized research. Like the world is your research lab, basically. And so there's many organizations, and if one person over here hates you, well, there's 15 other organizations, and then maybe they like you. And so you just need success in the aggregate. And so it's quite a nice space to work in for that reason, yeah.
Hi, thanks for the talk. Could you actually tell us more about the internship experience you mentioned during your talk, or as a PhD student, you going into it, and what were your thought process going into it, and then having done it, coming out of it, and how that impacted your PhD and onwards?
Yeah, so I remember when my first conference was CAV. I started my PhD in 96, 7, and I went to CAV 98, and I was just so impressed that Intel funded the proceedings of CAV. It's really funny, when advertisers go for the youth because it's very sticky. If you like that kind of drink, you're going to drink that kind of drink for many years, right? And so that was really that was who Apple. I think someone from Apple's here. They invested in this thing, smart move, right? Because for many, many years, people will be like, "Oh, Apple's so cool because they funded that thing." Well, it's it didn't cost them that much money ultimately, and they got a tax write-off anyway. So it's actually not that big a deal. I mean, we're in the same in AWS. I'm just saying, it's a really smart investment, small amount of money, very impactful for people, because you click and you're like, oh, great, that's my brand now. And so I was very impressed with Intel, and my advisor got $40,000 from Intel. If you think about it, it's really not very much money. But for me, a PhD student, I'm like, wow, this is so You're like, we're going to change the world. And so then it was like, well, as a part of that, so I'm going to tell a slightly long story, but you can pull me off the stage if you want. So I was going to do an internship, and all was great. And then there was this, there was a budget cut, and they were like, hey, bad news, because you hadn't actually signed your contract and sent it in yet. We actually have to kill your internship. And I was like crestfallen. But then they're like, oh, but we have this trick. Maybe we're going to try it. We're going to bring you in as a contractor, not an intern. But we'll just treat you like an intern. And so then I got this contract then, and it didn't actually have an ending date. It just said, you're a contractor at Intel. Okay. And so what was amazing is we were able to buy a house with that, because now it looked like I had a real job. So I was able to get a mortgage. I mean, like, the moment I got the mortgage, then like the job was over. And so I then paid the mortgage on my PhD stipend, but like that was pretty cool. So anyways, so I went in and I didn't know anything, and I was a PL person, and I thought monads were going to change the world, and Haskell is like the best language ever. And if you're not using Haskell, you must not care about computing. And I spent my entire time trying to convince everyone they should use monads. What was really cool there at the time is they used this language called FL, which actually is a lazy functional language. And they had this whole like, all the design, circuit verification tools were all sort of in FL, and they built a theorem prover in FL and so on. So I thought that was really cool. And then I got really into formal. I didn't really know anything about it, but I was commuting with a guy named Don Syme, who went on to write F#, the programming language. He was actually Mike Gordon's PhD student in theorem proving. I was a programming languages person, and we were stuck in traffic all the time going home together. And so he told me all about formal stuff. So then I went back to my advisor when I returned, and I'm like, this is going to change the world, so I'm going to do this. And he, to his credit, was like, I don't know anything about that, nor does anyone here at this university, but okay. And so actually my PhD was not very successful, to be honest, like, because I wasn't connected. My papers all got shot down in the formal methods world. Well, not all of them, but I didn't have a great publication record. No one's heard of my PhD. In part because I wasn't in the flow. I wasn't amongst, like, my advisor wasn't like super connected, and the other PhD students like didn't know what I was talking about. But that's how it went. So I'm happy to answer more questions, but I'll stop there.
Hi, so it seemed like you alluded to this problem a little bit during the talk, but you mentioned decreasing intellectual freedom due to the disappearance of things like Bell Labs. I also work for a national lab, and I know that no matter what country you're in, your research has to be constrained to the national interests. And so I'm wondering, where do you see the most intellectual freedom in research? Is that only constrained to academia, or do you have to be in that liminal space where you're collaborating with lots of different people?
Great question. By the way, now you know someone in the national lab, so you should, if you want to get your like bingo card, like met someone from a national lab, go talk to her. There's this quote from Strachey. Strachey was started the Oxford Computer Science Department as a contemporary of Turing's. That says the division between theory and practice in computing is injurious, that theoreticians don't know what to work on and practitioners don't know what they're doing, basically. I mean, that's not a direct quote, but then there's the other quote is like, the true test of intelligence is to keep two opposing views in your mind and make progress. So I'll get to why I just made those two quotes. So I spent years seeking out intellectual freedom. Like, I was actually a developer in the Windows kernel when I did the original like Zapata, which then led to Zap, which then led to Z3. So I wrote the first SMT solver in Microsoft, but I was actually a developer in the Windows kernel team. And I was like, I've got to get research freedom. And I moved my whole family from Seattle to Cambridge, England, seeking out a job in a research lab for intellectual freedom, and I got it. And if you look at my publication record and stuff, I think it went very well. It was very fun. But then what I realized is that being kept in bubble wrap away from the real problems is not the way to go. That anyone who's successful, like look at like Ken McMillan, look at like in my space, anyone who's doing a good job, who seems very disconnected from industry, kind of lying to you. What they're really doing is that they're figuring out the problems and they're abstracting them away and sort of getting rid of all the industrial smell from it, then solving it, and then publishing papers as if they were like thinking deep thoughts in there. But it's not true, right? They were actually talking to people in the university or visitors or whatever. They're learning about industrial problems. So actually, I've realized sort of counterintuitively that, and like look at Turing's best work. It was like during wartime, right? So like I've kind of realized that getting out of your comfort zone, so maintaining this view that you are doing research and you are thinking about 100, 200 years out from now, but you're using the gravitational pull of the big problem of the day, the war, the security issues, whatever are the big issues of the day, to sort of drive, and you just have to find that you have to find partial alignment between the bigger picture and the smaller picture, and drive on that. If you go back in history, like look at like logicians and so on, they were they were teaching high school also, right? So they were all the people were doing that also. So it's a challenge. So I don't know if I answered your question, but like yeah, that pure dream. Like, I just get to sit on my beanbag chair, and people send lots of money, and no one ever bugs me, and I'm just going to do amazing work, will just turn into nothing, because you won't know what to work on. And even, like, at Microsoft Research, what I saw was, I wasn't allowed, when I moved over to the research lab, we were not allowed, I'm sure it's not true today, so this is not representing Microsoft today, because I know there's been a lot of changes. But at that time, I was not allowed to talk to anyone in the Windows team. Why? Because the view was Microsoft Research was a massive distraction. And so I had, like, my Terminator work, like working on termination improvement, which was really aimed at device drivers, and the Slayer work, which was aimed at reasoning about memory safety of device drivers, really had very limited impact, did not become a part of the product. Why? Because they weren't allowed to talk to me. So I didn't like that. So I come to Amazon, and I have created a research life at scale. Like the things that you do at scale, if the things are moving fast enough and they're interesting enough, then you scale. And what do you scale? Well, you do the things you're really good at and are leveraged for you. And for me, those are the things that are basically I would do as a researcher, basic researcher anyways. But you know, like I know all the decision makers in Amazon, and they know me really well, and I can just send a text message and be like, we should do X, and it's like done, right? And I know about a lot of stuff way ahead of more people, other people, because of the connections I have now, and that helps me like think through things and like frame my research in a way that, like, yeah, that's, anyways.
So we are out of time, but I can't help ask this one last question,
okay,
selfishly.
Okay.
Were you hesitant or skeptical when you are applying formal techniques at the scale of Amazon? Because as a researcher, I build a prototype, and I'm happy if like at least 2 more others are using it, but like at the scale of AWS, yeah. I always wonder.
No, I always believed, because when I worked at, I mean, our tools they're solving the undecidable. So the only way, I didn't think of it that way. I thought of it this way. The only way to actually make progress when you're solving intractable or undecidable problems is to get even closer than you would normally need to get to the people who have the problem, and then frame it and tune it such that it works for their problems. And I learned that as I was actually at Prover, I was a pre-sales engineer. So what that mean? I went on site to companies like Cadence, Synopsys, Intel, and made the stat solver work for their use cases. And then when I worked on Terminator, it was just the observation like, yeah, I get it, it's undecidable, but it's going to work for device drivers just fine, right? And so like, and then like, so basically we made a tool that worked. And then if you look at the work, it's like 5 or 6 years of publications at POPL and CAV and PLDI, sort of like talking about like interesting formal methodsy, structural, theoretical things that come out of it. But it was driven by the idea that like, you know what, device drivers are just like pretty simple. They have cyclic doubly linked lists. They all need to terminate. Like, I bet we could do something lighter weight. And so yeah, I thought at Amazon, I didn't realize it would grow to the size. Like we're getting billions of requests per day to the solvers. We've got, I don't know, there's like 1,000 people in the Slack channel. There's like 20-something teams. Like it's huge. And big zeros being added to checks these days by customers because of the work. So it's much bigger than I ever thought it would grow. But I definitely thought that like me and like 5 or 6 people would make a lot of progress. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the insightful talk, and especially the Q&A.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Great, thanks.